In the dim light of a dusty training room, laughter cut through the air like a blade. Look at that tattoo. Probably got it from some video game game, a young recruit sneered, pointing at the silver-haired woman in the corner. Haley Brooks, 42, stood apart, her platinum hair cropped short, her steel gray eyes carrying a quiet weight that made others uneasy. They called her Grandma, their voices dripping with mockery, unaware of the faded numbers inked on her wrist, a mark from a life they couldn't imagine. She never flinched, never answered their taunts, but her silence held a story that would soon stop them cold. When a general stepped off an unscheduled helicopter, his eyes wide with recognition, he whispered, "That's a Reaper unit tattoo." Who is she? Why would a woman they dismissed as too old, too quiet, bring a legend to his knees with a single glance? Haley Brooks, a 42-year-old with silver hair, joins an elite military training program, enduring mockery as Grandma from young recruits like Reed. Her unmatched skills in combat and navigation hint at a hidden past. During a chaotic exercise, she leads her team to victory using a hand-drawn map, silencing doubters. Then General Davis arrives, saluting her as a legendary Reaper unit member who survived impossible missions. The recruits, shamed, realize their mistake. Haley forgives them, offering to teach. What secrets does her past hold, and will the recruits truly learn from her wisdom? Subscribe to our channel to uncover more tales of silent heroes like Haley Brooks. Honor those who serve without seeking fame. Join our community, share your thoughts, and help us celebrate unsung champions. Click subscribe now. Don't miss the next inspiring story waiting to be told. At the Joint Military Training Center, the morning air was crisp as Haley Brooks stepped through the gates at precisely 5:45 a.m., a full 15 minutes before the day's schedule demanded. At 42, she stood out starkly among the younger recruits, her silver hair cut sharp and military precise, glinting like polished steel under the dawn light. Her gray eyes, steady and unyielding, carried a quiet intensity that seemed to unsettle those who met her gaze. Dressed in a mix of civilian and military attire, black cargo pants, a faded green t-shirt, and combat boots worn from years of unseen battles, she moved with a purpose that felt both deliberate and enigmatic. On her left wrist, partially hidden by a weathered leather bracelet, was a tattoo, a cryptic sequence of numbers that drew curious glances but revealed nothing. To the others, she was an anomaly, an older woman in a program built for the young and ambitious. They dubbed her Grandma, their whispers laced with mockery. The training room buzzed with the energy of 23 recruits, most barely out of their teens, each eager to prove their mettle in the advanced combat program. Among them, Reed, a brash 20-year-old from Texas, carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed video games had taught him all there was to know about warfare. "Look at that tattoo," he sneered, pointing at Haley as she sat quietly in the back corner. "Probably got it from Call of Duty." Laughter rippled through the group, sharp and cutting, as another recruit, Sarah, chimed in. "What's she doing here? This is advanced training, not a senior fitness class." The taunts continued during the morning roll call, where names were barked with crisp precision. When Haley's turn came, she merely nodded, her silence louder than any shout. Lieutenant Monroe, the program's overseer with 8 years of experience, felt a growing unease as he observed Haley. Her file was a mystery, its pages obscured by thick black marker lines, stamped with classified level 5, in bold red ink. Only her name and age were legible, along with a single line noting her transfer by direct order of General Davis. No explanations, no questions permitted. Monroe didn't like it, but orders were orders. He watched as Haley moved through the training with a precision that bordered on unnatural. During weapons inspections, while others flaunted their textbook knowledge, Haley handled her rifle with a quiet expertise, checking components the recruits didn't even know existed. Her movements were fluid, almost mechanical, as if muscle memory guided her through tasks she'd performed countless times before. "Hey, Grandma," Reed called out during target practice, his voice dripping with mockery. "Need help loading that thing? These aren't muskets from your war." The others snickered, but Haley didn't flinch. She never responded to the jabs, the whispered jokes, or the blatant disrespect. Her silence wasn't weakness. It carried a weight that made the air feel heavier, a subtle threat woven into her calm. Monroe noticed it all, his discomfort growing. There was something about Haley, her movements in combat drills, her uncanny ability to anticipate exercises before they were announced, the way she seemed to see through the chaos of training scenarios. When he pressed her about her past, her response was always the same. I trained overseas. That's all you need to know. The finality in her tone left no room for further questions. On the third day, the recruits faced a grueling urban warfare simulation, a test designed to push even the sharpest teams to their limits. The objective was clear, but brutal. Navigate a mock city, evade simulated enemy fire, and extract a hostage within 20 minutes. Most teams crumbled under the pressure, their plans unraveling as GPS systems failed and ambushes came from unexpected angles. Haley's team, led by a self-appointed Reed, was no exception. 15 minutes in, they were floundering, lost, disoriented, and pinned down by enemy fire with no progress toward the hostage. Reed's confidence had evaporated, his orders growing frantic as the team spiraled. Then Haley stepped forward. Without a word, she pulled a worn map from her pocket, her fingers tracing routes with a speed that suggested she'd memorized the terrain long before the exercise began. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and steady, issuing commands with a clarity that cut through the chaos. She moved like a shadow, guiding the team through narrow alleys, anticipating enemy positions, and dismantling traps with a precision that left the others stunned. Reed, his bravado shattered, followed her lead in silence. Sarah, who had laughed at Haley days earlier, watched with wide eyes, her earlier mockery replaced by a creeping sense of shame. Another recruit, Martinez, hung on Haley's every word, his eagerness to learn evident in his quick obedience. When the exercise ended, Haley's team was the only one to complete the objective, extracting the hostage with seconds to spare. The training room fell silent as the recruits processed what they'd witnessed. Monroe, standing at the edge of the field, felt a chill. He'd seen skilled soldiers before. But Haley was something else, something more. That afternoon, an unscheduled helicopter touched down, kicking up dust as General Davis stepped out. His eyes locked on Haley, widening with recognition. That's a Reaper unit tattoo, he said quietly to Monroe, his voice tinged with awe. Who is she? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Why would a general fly out to meet a grandma? The recruits, once mocking, now watched Haley with a mix of curiosity and respect. Reed, his ego bruised, approached her later, his voice low as he mumbled an apology, seeking a chance to learn from her. Sarah, tears staining her cheeks, couldn't meet Haley's eyes, her earlier laughter now a source of burning shame. Martinez, meanwhile, lingered nearby, hungry to understand the skills of the woman who had turned their failure into triumph. Haley remained as she always was, quiet, composed, her gray eyes unreadable. She didn't bask in the shift of their attitudes or seek their approval. She simply continued, her past a shadow that loomed larger with every step, a mystery etched in ink on her wrist and in the unspoken weight of her presence. Haley Brooks, a 42-year-old woman with striking silver hair, carried the weight of a shadowed past as a former member of the elite Reaper unit. Her skills, honed in ways the recruits around her could scarcely imagine, were matched only by the enigma she embodied. General Davis, a seasoned officer with a gaze that could pierce through years, recognized her immediately. He offered her a salute, a gesture heavy with unspoken acknowledgement of her history. Lieutenant Monroe, the overseer of the training program, wasn't so welcoming. Haley's classified file, a dossier shrouded in redactions, left him uneasy, his authority strained by the mystery she represented. Among the recruits, Reed, a brash 20-year-old with a chip on his shoulder, saw her as an easy target, mocking her relentlessly. Sarah, another recruit, joined in the laughter at first, only to later drown in her own shame. Martinez, quieter but observant, sensed there was more to Haley and hungered to learn from her. During a tactical exercise, Haley revealed a glimpse of her expertise. She unfurled a hand-drawn map, sketched on weathered paper, and pointed to a route absent from their official materials. It snaked through abandoned structures, skirting the heart of simulated conflict zones. "Follow me," she said, her voice low but commanding, the first direct order she'd given. The recruits, hesitant but out of options, trailed her. What followed was not just victory, but a record-breaking performance, their team navigating the course with precision that left the instructors stunned. Yet, instead of earning respect, Haley's triumph fueled resentment. Reed and his clique refused to accept that a woman who could pass for their grandmother had outshone them. Over lunch, Reed sneered, she probably memorized the course. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Or maybe she's cozying up to Monroe for the answers. The taunts grew sharper, more personal. During equipment checks, Reed's voice would ring out, "Careful, don't let Grandma throw out her hip lugging that rifle." On grueling runs, someone would jeer, "Ease up, we're leaving the senior citizen in the dust." But Haley, always in the top three, her breath steady and her pace unrelenting, never flinched. The cruelty peaked during communications training. When Haley's turn came, Reed snatched the radio, his voice dripping with mockery, as he drawled, "Attention, base camp. We've got a lost civilian on the grounds. Elderly woman, seems confused. Send medical for a dementia check." The group roared with laughter, their voices echoing across the training field. Lieutenant Monroe overheard but turned away, torn between enforcing discipline and avoiding the classified specter that was Haley's past. She stood there, her face a mask of calm, absorbing the ridicule without a word. When Reed finished, she reclaimed the radio and delivered a flawless, tactical transmission in half the expected time, her voice steady as steel. The tension simmered, a storm waiting to break. It erupted during the last stand protocol, the program's most brutal exercise. The scenario was chaos, a base under siege, communications severed, enemy forces closing in. No GPS, no digital maps, just raw strategy and basic gear. 20 minutes in, Reed's leadership had collapsed. His squad was pinned in a dead-end simulated gunfire raining down from angles they hadn't anticipated. Their paper maps were useless. None of them had mastered reading terrain. Radio static drowned their attempts to coordinate. Reed's frustration boiled over as he shouted above the blank rounds and smoke grenades, "How are we supposed to navigate without GPS? This isn't real training." Haley, who had been watching silently from the rear, stepped forward with purpose. From her pocket, she produced a hand-drawn map. Not the standard issue, but a detailed sketch she'd made during the briefing. It marked elevation shifts, sight lines, natural cover, and a red-inked path to safety. "The exfiltration point is here," she said, her finger tapping an unmarked spot. "But we can't go straight. The enemy has overlapping fields of fire." Reed stared, bewildered. "How do you even know that?" he demanded. Haley's response was simple, almost gentle. "Because I can read terrain. Follow this route. Single file, 20-meter intervals. When I signal, drop and wait." Reed bristled, his pride wounded. "I'm not taking orders from some old lady who learned tactics in Vietnam." The other recruits exchanged glances, the ticking clock amplifying their failure. They were losing, badly. For the first time, Haley locked eyes with Reed, her gaze carrying the weight of battles he'd never seen. Her voice, when she spoke, wasn't loud, but it resonated with an authority that felt ancient, forged in realities far beyond a training ground. "You can stay here and fail, or you can follow someone who's done this for real. Your choice. Recruit." Something in her tone, unyielding, certain, shifted the air. Even Reed, defiance crumbling, fell into line as Haley led them through a route that seemed impossible, her map and instincts guiding them through the chaos to safety. In the wake of an impeccable training exercise, the team had outmaneuvered every simulated ambush, reached the evacuation zone in record time, and conquered objectives that left other groups in the dust. At the final checkpoint, Lieutenant Monroe stood, his face a mask of unease, as though he sensed the world was about to shift. The air pulsed with the roar of rotor blades as a Blackhawk helicopter descended, unannounced, its presence heavy with unspoken importance. The engines quieted, and a figure in a pristine dress uniform stepped onto the ground, moving with purpose toward the group. Monroe snapped to attention, saluting crisply, and the recruits followed suit, their breaths still ragged from the drill. It was General Davis, a name that carried the weight of authority, the same name etched on Haley Brooks's transfer orders. He bypassed Monroe without a glance, his eyes scanning past the panting recruits until they landed on Haley, standing quietly at the group's edge, her silver hair glinting in the sunlight. Time seemed to pause as Davis studied her, his gaze tracing a history only they shared. Then, his voice thick with reverence, he spoke. "Welcome back, Sergeant Brooks. Reaper Unit thought we'd lost you." He raised his hand in a salute, a gesture so laden with meaning it silenced the world around them. The recruits stood rooted, their earlier arrogance crumbling. Reaper Unit, a name from whispered legends, tied to missions that defied reality, to soldiers who were more myth than mortal. They had mocked her. Reed, the brash young recruit, had sneered at her age, her deliberate movements, her silver hair. Sarah had stifled laughter, whispering that Haley was a relic, out of step with their youthful energy. Now they stood stunned as a general descended from the heavens, not to review their performance or address their commander, but to honor a woman they dismissed as irrelevant. In a world of noise, roaring helicopters, distant gunfire, the relentless grind of training, what could halt it all? Not a barked order, not a deafening blast, but the quiet power of a general saluting a soldier whose name had been erased from history, but never from memory. The training ground fell into a profound hush. The helicopter's hum faded, the echoes of gunfire from nearby drills seemed to vanish, and even the wind held its breath. Reed's mouth hung open, his earlier bravado replaced by a humbling realization. Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears, her laughter now a bitter memory. Martinez, eager and awestruck, gazed at Haley with newfound respect. The other recruits stood motionless, struggling to process the scene unfolding before them. General Davis lowered his salute, but his posture remained rigid, his weathered face a tapestry of emotions. Relief at her survival, respect for her unmatched skill, and a trace of sorrow for the years lost to silence. This wasn't a mere reunion. It was a sacred moment, a reckoning of a legacy too heavy for words. Lieutenant Monroe, visibly rattled, stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "Sir, I wasn't informed of any command visits. Should I assemble the full unit?" Davis turned, his gaze steady but not harsh. "Stand down, Lieutenant. This isn't an inspection. This is personal." He motioned for the recruits to gather closer, his presence commanding their obedience. Reed shuffled forward, his earlier swagger replaced by the posture of someone awaiting judgment. Sarah wiped her tear-streaked face, her shame palpable. Martinez leaned in, hungry to understand the woman he'd underestimated. Davis's voice cut through the silence, resonant and unyielding, the voice of a man who had led legions through the fires of war. 18 years ago, there was a unit that never existed on paper. No records, no medals, no trace. They were called Reaper Unit. He paused, letting the name settle like a stone in still water. Whispers of Reaper Unit had drifted through late-night barracks talks, on obscure corners of military forums, always dismissed as myth or exaggeration. But Davis's tone brooked no skepticism. For 9 months, they operated in places no map acknowledges. They completed missions the Pentagon's best minds called impossible, and they succeeded because of one woman. He turned to Haley, who stood like a statue, her eyes locked on a distant point, as if she were seeing shadows the others could only imagine. Sergeant Haley Brooks, Davis continued, kept 12 soldiers alive in conditions where survival was a mathematical impossibility. She guided them through hostile lands with nothing but her instincts, her courage, and a will that refused to yield. His words carved into the recruits' minds, reshaping their understanding of the woman they had scorned. Haley remained silent, her stillness a testament to a strength that needed no words, no justification. In the dusty haze of the training field, Haley Brooks stood apart, her silver hair catching the faint sunlight as she observed the recruits with a quiet intensity. At 42, her presence was unassuming, almost invisible among the younger soldiers who darted around her, their energy brimming with the confidence of youth. Her past, a labyrinth of secrets and scars earned in the shadowy ranks of the Reaper Unit, was locked away, known only to a select few. Yet her skills, honed through years of navigating impossible missions with nothing but paper maps, gut instinct, and raw determination, remained as sharp as ever. She'd performed battlefield surgeries with no formal training, made tactical calls that defied every textbook, and emerged from chaos with a calm that seemed almost otherworldly. To the recruits, though, she was just the older woman they barely noticed, her weathered hands and steady gaze dismissed as relics of a bygone era. General Davis, a towering figure with a chest full of medals and eyes that carried the weight of countless decisions, stood before the assembled recruits. His voice, gravelly yet commanding, cut through the murmurs as he addressed them. He knew Haley's history, every classified detail, every sacrifice, and as he spoke, he saluted her with a respect that made the recruits shift uncomfortably. His words began to unravel the mystery of the woman they had underestimated. Sergeant Brooks, he said, his tone deliberate, was part of a unit so elite, so covert, that its name was whispered only in the highest circles. She operated in shadows, making choices that saved lives and altered battles, all without a single rulebook to guide her. The recruits exchanged glances, confusion rippling through their ranks. Reed, a brash 20-year-old with a smirk that had yet to be humbled, felt a cold knot form in his gut. Every taunt he'd hurled at Haley, calling her grandma, joking she'd be better off in a yoga class than a combat zone, now echoed in his mind like a judgment. General Davis's voice grew heavier as he continued. When the Reaper unit was disbanded, Sergeant Brooks made a choice. She didn't want parades or medals. She didn't want her name carved into some monument. She asked to vanish completely. If the mission is classified, she told us, then so am I. We honored that request even though it meant one of our greatest would fade into obscurity, her sacrifices buried with her. His words landed like stones, and Sarah, a young female recruit who had once laughed loudest at Reed's cruel jabs over the radio, felt her chest tighten. The dementia joke she'd giggled at now burned in her memory, and tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as shame consumed her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the sobs. But they came anyway, raw and unstoppable. The general's gaze swept over the recruits, his expression unyielding, but not unkind. He wasn't done. 3 weeks ago, Sergeant Brooks reached out to me. She wanted to return, not for glory, but to see if she could still serve, still teach, still make a difference. But she had one condition. Her past couldn't define her. She wanted to know if her knowledge, her experience, could stand on its own. Would you value her for what she could offer? Or would you only respect her if her reputation was shouted from the rooftops? His eyes locked onto Reed, who stood frozen, his face pale as the weight of his failure crashed over him like a frigid wave. Haley hadn't hidden her identity to trick them. She'd been testing them, testing their ability to see beyond appearances, to recognize wisdom in its quiet, unassuming forms. And they had failed, spectacularly. The day's exercise, General Davis explained, was meant to be Haley's final assessment, not of her skills, which were beyond question, but of the recruits themselves. Could this new generation, so quick to judge, learn from someone who chose humility over ego, who let her actions speak louder than any title? Lieutenant Monroe, the training program's overseer, stepped forward, his face ashen. He'd seen Haley's classified file, its contents sealed behind layers of red tape, and it had made him uneasy from the start. Now his voice trembled as he spoke. "Sir, if I'd known who she was, I would have—" The general cut him off sharply. "Exactly, Lieutenant. That was the point. To see who among you could recognize expertise, no matter how it was packaged. You didn't. None of you did." The silence that followed was suffocating. Tears streaked down Sarah's face, and other recruits stared at the ground. Their boots suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. Shame hung heavy in the air, a collective weight they couldn't shake. General Davis turned to Haley, his voice softening but still carrying authority. "Sergeant, the choice is yours. You've seen how they respond to excellence when it doesn't come with fanfare. Do you still want to take on this assignment?" For the first time since the general's arrival, Haley spoke. Her voice was low, steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "They're young," she said simply, her words carrying across the field without effort. "Young people make mistakes. The real question is whether they learn from them." Her gaze settled on Reed, whose tears now flowed freely, carving tracks down his dirt-streaked face. The true test isn't recognizing a hero when they're draped in medals and saluted by generals. It's recognizing wisdom when it arrives quietly, without a name or a rank to announce it. Reed stepped forward, his voice cracking under the weight of his regret. "Ma'am, I don't know how to apologize for what I said, for what we said. We were wrong, completely wrong." His words stumbled out, raw and desperate, as if he could somehow undo the mockery he'd flung so carelessly. Haley studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "Apologies are just words, recruit," she said. "Show me you've learned something. Maybe then we'll call it even." A faint smile broke across General Davis's face, the first since he'd arrived. "I think that's a yes, Sergeant. Welcome back to active training duty." He turned to the recruits one final time, his voice firm but carrying a glimmer of hope. "From this moment forward, you will address Sergeant Brooks with the respect she's earned, not because of her past, but because of who she is and what she can teach you. Don't waste this chance." As the recruit stood in the fading light, Martinez, a quiet recruit who had watched Haley's every move with eager curiosity, felt a spark of determination. He'd seen something in her from the start, something the others had missed, and now he knew. This was a chance to learn from someone whose legend was written not in medals, but in the lives she'd saved and the battles she'd won. For Reed and Sarah, the weight of their shame was a lesson they'd carry forever. For Haley, it was simply another day. One more chance to prove that wisdom, not ego, was the true measure of a soldier. At 42, Haley Brooks carried the weight of a past cloaked in shadow bones, her silver hair catching the light as she moved with a quiet grace that belied her extraordinary skills. Once a member of the elite Reaper unit, her history was a tightly guarded secret, known only to a select few. General Davis, a weathered officer with decades of command etched into his stern features, recognized her immediately. His eyes held a flicker of reverence as he saluted her, a gesture that spoke of shared battles and unspoken trust. Lieutenant Monroe, tasked with overseeing the training program, was less at ease. Haley's classified file sat like a locked vault in his mind, its contents stirring a quiet unease that he couldn't shake. Among the recruits, Reed, a brash 20-year-old, strutted with the arrogance of youth, tossing mocking jibes at Haley's unassuming presence. Sarah, another recruit, joined in the laughter, her amusement tinged with careless cruelty. But Martinez, eager and observant, sensed something more in Haley, his curiosity piqued by the understated woman who seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. The morning after General Davis's departure, the training facility's mess hall felt transformed, as if the air itself had shifted. The previous day's revelation about Haley's past had spread like wildfire, searing away the recruits' earlier disdain. When Haley entered, tray in hand, the room fell silent, not with mockery, but with a newfound respect. A young recruit, his face flushed with earnestness, leapt to his feet and pulled out a chair for her at the central table. It was a small act, but it carried the weight of a seismic shift, a stark contrast to the derision she'd faced just days before. Reed approached her table, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous energy that made his hands tremble. In his palms, he cradled a small, hand-carved wooden badge, its rough edges bearing the skull and wing emblem of the Reaper unit. The craftsmanship was clumsy but heartfelt, the product of hours spent laboring through the night. "Ma'am, Sergeant Brooks," he stammered, his voice thick with the shame of his earlier mockery. "I made this for you. It's not much, and it doesn't erase what I said. But I get it now. What you did for your unit, what you've been trying to teach us. I see it." Haley's fingers closed around the badge, her sharp eyes tracing its uneven lines. For the first time since arriving at the facility, the hard lines of her face softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through her guarded exterior. The other recruits, drawn by the moment, began to gather around, each offering their own gestures of atonement. Sarah, her eyes red-rimmed with regret, presented a notebook filled with meticulous notes, capturing every tactical insight Haley had quietly imparted during training. Another recruit who thought that another recruit, his voice quiet but sincere, handed her a sketch of the navigation route she'd devised during a critical exercise, a route that had turned a near disaster into a triumph. He spoke of preserving it, a lesson for future soldiers to study and honor. Martinez, his eagerness undimmed, stepped forward, his voice tentative but resolute. "Sergeant Brooks," he said, "could you teach us, I mean really teach us, how to shoot like you, how to read a map like you did? We want to learn it right this time." The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. Lieutenant Monroe, who had been watching from a distance, approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He set one before Haley, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Colombian," he said simply, "from my personal stash. Figured you'd appreciate something better than the swill they serve here." As the crowd of recruits grew, their apologies and gestures weaving a tapestry of newfound respect, another figure appeared in the mess hall doorway. General Davis had returned, but this time he shed the formality of his dress uniform for simple fatigues. In his hands, he carried a small, weathered object, a broken wristwatch, its metal tarnished and its face cracked, the hands frozen in time. He approached Haley's table and set it down gently, his voice low but steady. "Thought you might want this back," he said. "Your old watch, the one you dismantled to make a compass when our GPS failed in Kandahar. That little trick saved us all." Haley's gaze locked onto the watch, her breath catching as the memories flooded back. Her fingers, steady and deliberate, lifted the broken timepiece, her thumb brushing over the cracked face as if it could summon the past. For the first time since the recruits had known her, her eyes betrayed a raw, unguarded emotion. "I never thought I'd see this again," she whispered, her voice barely audible, heavy with the weight of battles fought and comrades lost. Later that afternoon, Haley stood alone at the base's memorial wall, a slab of black granite etched with the names of fallen soldiers. Near the bottom, tucked away in a small, unassuming section, were the words Reaper Unit, Classified Operations. She rested her hand on the cool stone, her fingers tracing the carved letters as if she could feel the presence of those she'd lost. "We're still here," she murmured, a quiet promise to the names that lingered in her heart. Behind her, the soft crunch of footsteps broke the silence. Reed and the other recruits had followed, forming a perfect line at attention. Without a word, they raised their hands in a crisp salute, honoring not just Haley but the wall of names behind her. In that moment, they understood. The brashness, the laughter, the careless disdain, they had all melted away, replaced by a profound recognition of what it meant to serve with honor. Haley Brooks, with her quiet strength and unspoken scars, had taught them that true honor didn't demand attention or shout its presence. It lived in the silence, in the steady resolve of those who carried on, bearing the weight of their past while forging a path for those who would follow. In a world consumed by the glitter of social media stardom and the clamor for instant acclaim, we often overlook the quiet strength of those who let their actions speak louder than their profiles. Haley Brooks, a 42-year-old woman with silver hair and a past cloaked in mystery, stood as a living testament to this truth. Once a member of the elite Reaper unit, her skills were honed in shadows, her legacy etched in deeds few could comprehend. Yet, to the young recruits at the training camp, she was just an older woman with unconventional ways, easily dismissed in a culture that mistakes noise for competence and flash for value. The recruits, brimming with youthful arrogance, saw Haley's reserved demeanor and unassuming presence as signs of irrelevance. Reed, a brash 20-year-old, led the charge, his mocking laughter cutting through the air as he scoffed at her methods. Sarah, another recruit, joined in, her giggles masking an insecurity she'd later confront. They judged her by her age, her quiet confidence, and her lack of flashy credentials, blind to the depth of her experience. How often do we fall into the same trap? How often do we size someone up based on their lack of a verified badge or a viral post, assuming their worth lies in their visibility rather than their substance? But Haley wasn't there to prove them wrong, at least not in the way they expected. She moved among them with a patience that bordered on grace, her every action a lesson in humility and resilience. The recruit's dismissal of her wasn't born of malice, but of ignorance, a reflection of a world that equates loudness with leadership and popularity with prowess. Haley's experiment, subtle yet deliberate, exposed this flaw in human nature. She didn't demand respect with titles or uniforms. She earned it through actions that spoke louder than any badge ever could. The turning point came not with fanfare, but with a quiet revelation. General Davis, a high-ranking officer whose stern gaze carried the weight of years, recognized Haley's past. His salute wasn't just a gesture, it was a bridge between her hidden history and the present, a moment that forced the recruits to reconsider their assumptions. Lieutenant Monroe, the training program manager, had always been uneasy about Haley's classified file, sensing the enigma she represented. Yet even he couldn't fully grasp the depth of her expertise until it unfolded before him. The most profound moment, however, wasn't the general's salute or the recruit's stunned silence. It was Haley's choice to forgive those who had belittled her. She could have walked into the camp on day one, credentials blazing, and demanded their respect. Instead, she gave them space to stumble, to learn, to grow. Reed, once the loudest of her critics, carved a wooden badge with his own hands, an apology that carried the weight of his transformation. It wasn't just a token, it was a symbol of his awakening to the gift of her guidance, a gift he'd initially failed to see. Sarah, too, faced her shame, her tears a quiet admission of her misjudgment. Martinez, ever eager, soaked up Haley's lessons, his admiration a testament to her ability to inspire without ego. Haley's broken watch, returned to her by General Davis, was more than a sentimental trinket. It was a relic of her ingenuity, a reminder of the time she navigated a mission using analog tools in a world reliant on GPS. In an era where digital solutions reigned supreme, she proved that the old ways, rooted in skill and resourcefulness, remained vital. Her methods weren't outdated, they were foundational, a quiet rebuke to a culture obsessed with the new and shiny. At the memorial wall, the true cost of Haley's service came into focus. Each name etched in stone represented a fallen comrade, a silent hero who never made it home. When Haley whispered, "We're still here," it wasn't just about her own survival. It was a vow to carry forward the memory and mission of those who had given everything. The recruits, standing at attention, saluted not just Haley, but every unsung professional who serves without seeking the spotlight. They honored the teachers who guide without arrogance, the experts who solve problems without fanfare, the heroes who choose impact over fame. Look around you. Who are the quiet professionals in your life? The ones making things work while others bask in the glow of unearned credit? Who are the unsung heroes solving problems behind the scenes, overlooked because they don't fit the mold of what success is supposed to look like? True honor doesn't need a spotlight. It thrives in the recognition of those wise enough to see it, those mature enough to learn from the ordinary-looking teachers who carry extraordinary wisdom.